morning.
Sister Mary Jane Lubinski, a.k.a. Sister Francis Aurelia. Back to Mary Jane Lubinski. Thank you for coming, and I know you were very anxious and excited to be able to share your story with the congregation, with anyone who's looking on YouTube, with former classmates, and so we are delighted that you said yes.
Thank you, Peg. It's nice to be here today, and I'm happy to share the story.
Good, good. Now, you're a Detroiter.
I am, indeed.
Through and through. And you have many experiences that I'm anxious to have you share with us. So let's start at the beginning, as much as you want to, relative to your family, where you grew up, your schooling.
I grew up on the west side of Detroit, and I attended St. Luke's grade school, and that was run by the Sisters of Charity. Now, when I was about in the second grade, I kind of had an inkling that I wanted to be a sister. Reason being, I came from a very religious family,
Yeah.
and my older sister had become an aspirant for the Little Sisters of the Poor.
Oh.
And I loved the sisters at school, and I always wanted to serve God. And it just kind of came out when I was little, stayed with me. And when I finished the 8th grade, I went to Rosary High School. And that's where I first met the Adrian Dominicans. It was wonderful. I absolutely loved the Adrian sisters. It was their joy. It was their spirit of community. It was the sisterhood that I felt. As I was a high school kid, the way I would be disciplined would be that I would not be allowed to go to school on Saturday.
Oh, wow.
And be involved in some activity there to help out, with whatever was needed. I was always volunteering and wanting to be involved. I did learn that if I was very quiet and good on Friday night, they reneged and I got to go.
They being your parents.
Parents, that's right.
Okay.
So I was the 4th of 5 children, 1 boy and 4 girls. And I entered the community right after high school. I had my summer as a senior, and then I entered right away.
In September.
Of 1966.
And how did your parents and your sisters and brother take that?
They were fine, absolutely fine with it, and I think it was no big surprise.
Oh, that's good. That's good. All right, and your religious name?
My religious name was Francis Aurelia. It was my father's name, Francis, and my mother, Aurelia. I had that name for 1 year. Because, you see, I entered at such a time when it was really, we walked in with the Baltimore Catechism and we walked out with Vatican II.
Interesting. Interesting.
We wore the old habit, and we were the last group to do that. And at profession, we had different veils. You know, as novices, we had the old traditional veil, but we were
the soft veils. Or the headgear?
The headgear.
Oh, okay.
So we had the best of the old and the fresh of the new.
Oh, good. And did they send you around with the new veil?
No.
Yeah.
I think they used professed sisters for that.
They used professed sisters, and we always said the pretty ones got to
Of
go
course,
around.
of course. You must have been sent.
No, I wasn't. No, I wasn't.
Can't believe
All right.
that.
Was there someone in high school, a sister or a teacher, that was very instrumental?
They were. I would say Joan Sullivan, who was Edmund Marie, was my sponsor, and Pat Johnson, who was Misericordia. Okay. So Joan sponsored me, which means that she helped me get ready, and she was someone I talked to on a regular basis, almost like a spiritual director when I was a high school girl. And then Pat Johnson was my high school senior homeroom teacher, and I just dearly loved her.
Joan Sullivan, did she go to Dominican after that? Maybe you don't know.
I don't know.
Trying to place her.
I don't know.
Okay. So then you entered. How many of you were there when you entered?
74.
Okay, 74. And how many are you now?
I think we're about 12.
Wow.
I think so. My numbers could be
Yeah,
off.
yeah.
So,
Yeah.
but to the best of my recall, we're 12 or 14. I think we're about 12.
What was an experience you had in the novitiate or in the formation program that stands out for you?
There are so many. For me personally, the long-lasting effect is meditation and journalizing.
Mm-hmm.
I learned it at that time, and it has been my mainstay as recent as this weekend, meditating about and journalizing about what it means to be 70, what it means to enter this new decade, and Sacred Seven, what's that going to call. So there were many, many wonderful stories, the relationships of the women, but also really respecting a life of prayer and meditation, and for me, writing. It's something I've kept up my whole life.
And you're a beautiful writer, looking at the letters that you send out to the
Thank you.
sisters. Yes.
Thank you.
You mentioned that you were entered at a time like with the Baltimore Catechism in one hand and perhaps the Vatican documents in the other. How was that change for you? Or what do you remember specifically about the changes of Vatican II?
I would have to say, and again, my quote may be not totally accurate, the joys, griefs, and anxieties of peoples are our joys, griefs, and anxieties. So for me, religious life has been a call to the margins, a call to serve those most in need. And as I look back and reflect, the whole journey has been an evolving kind of spiral where one thing has led to another. And I can look back and I can see how this happened and how this happened. And it has been sacred. I'm very itinerant. As recently as this week, I was with someone, and there was a bit of a wee tinge of longing that I wasn't someone who stayed put, but I was a person who moved and who was called and who listened to the signs of the times and responded to the needs. Like most of us, I taught grade school. I never went beyond the third grade. Mm-hmm. I taught second and third for 6 years. And then I moved to, and that was from Ohio to California, and then to Arizona, where I did religious education for 5 years, because I wanted to work with people in faith formation. Mm-hmm. I loved the children in the school, loved what I did, and loved what I did everywhere and where I lived with the sisters. But there was always this call. There was always this push. So after 5 years in the parish, which I loved, and it was a wonderful, wonderful St. Jerome's in Arizona, outside of Phoenix, then the community put out a call, and they said, are there sisters who are willing to go to Appalachia, to go to a place where we don't have any sisters, where the bishop welcomes us, and where there's clearly a need? Mm-hmm. So the congregation sent out the request, the invitation. So I was one of 8 people who responded, and we came into Adrian. After a process of discernment, I felt the call that this was really where I was to be next. The interesting thing is, when I was a senior in high school, for graduation, I had wanted to go to Appalachia for 2 weeks. Mm-hmm. So I spent 2 weeks in Appalachia as a volunteer.
Whereabouts?
In Kentucky. In Kentucky. Father Biding was a priest, Glen Mary, I believe, who was very instrumental in that area and bringing in volunteers, and it was a wonderful experience. And so there was that call back then. And there was seeds were sown. So all along my life, seeds were sown that, given the proper watering and nurturing, they blossomed. And Appalachia was wonderful. I was there with 3 of our women. We lived in an old farmhouse. We worked in the garden, and we were told to go and be a presence. Well, it's kind of difficult for someone with my energy to go and be a presence.
Really?
So it
Who were
was.
you with?
I was with Diane McGirt and Norma Dell and Gretchen Greening.
Right, okay.
It was wonderful. It was a whole totally new experience. Talk about outside your comfort zone. It was we would heat with wood, so I had to learn to chop and saw wood and load the wood, burning stove. We had oil backup, but we mostly used the wood. It was just an experience of simplicity, of back to the earth, of sacredness, and a whole different culture. Very, very expansive. After 7.5 years there, I began to hear the call to work with people with AIDS. And the reason for that was I was working in the mountains of Virginia, the coal fields, and I was doing legal advocacy work for all the public benefits programs. I was helping the poorest of the poor who had no source of income get an income. So a lot of the work that I did was disability work, representing people before an administrative law judge to get a check because they couldn't work, there was no work. And I did that with great joy, delight, and success. Learned as I went, on-the-job training. I worked for legal aid, and we did not charge the people. And we worked in the 7 poorest counties of Virginia. But at that time, HIV and AIDS was an epidemic. And one of the professors that I had in graduate school appeared on the cover of Time magazine. He was a priest, and he had died of AIDS. I was so moved by that I began to educate myself and to raise my awareness. These were the people that Christ would have served.
Definitely.
They were ostracized. Young men went home for Thanksgiving dinner and they were given a paper plate and plasticware. They may or may not have sat at the family table. And so I thought, this is where Christ would be. You know, we say in our vision statement, outraged by the injustices of our day. I was outraged. On vacation with 4 other Adrian Dominicans, I was reading. I was sitting at the dock by the water. They were all in the house. And I read, people were being denied access to funeral homes, ambulances, and hospitals. I ran back and I said, I'm out of here. I'm gone. In 6 months, I will have a job. I'm going to go work with AIDS. So I asked for permission from the congregation. I said, these are the signs of our times. This is where the Spirit is leading. I went to Atlanta, a whole new community, a whole new city. I went by myself, but others joined me afterwards. And I worked there, again for legal aid, representing people for disability. Typically, someone like an operating room nurse that one of the key hospitals fired. And I stood with that man for unemployment benefits, and I said, you may not want him to work in the operating room, but you must make a reasonable effort to accommodate. You must keep him at that pay rate and have him be a file clerk. We won. Other cases, a public accountant, CPA, go before the judge. Sir, he's brilliant, but you wouldn't want him to balance your checkbook today. We won. Because they could recognize that this devastating disease was taking out the best and the brightest at a young age. And so we became the advocate.
Wonderful.
When the medicines got better, we began a housing office called Living Room, where we became a clearinghouse for AIDS housing and regular low-cost housing and getting landlords to open their doors to someone with such a disability. I was with them for 5 years. It was wonderful. I loved it. We ran and we worked hard and we built relationships and we became the central portal for people to get housing All the AIDS housing offices agreed to use one application, and they worked through our office. We did a survey of women with children with HIV and their housing needs. And then that led to Africa.
Good.
In the year 2000, my mother died. And that opened up the door. And I said, okay, now I can hand over this living room. Better people will move it forward, and they did. And I said, it's time now that I go to Africa. I had to talk my way there. I had to convince the council that this was a need and this was the signs of the times, and I really wanted to go to the eye of the storm. So I went to South Africa after doing a search. We went for 6 weeks. Jean Tobin accompanied me, and we went to Kenya, Tanzania, and South Africa. We did a study, and we came up with 13 possibilities. The congregation said, okay, fine, but you have to be self-sufficient. So I was offered a position with the Catholic Institute of Education. They would pay me, and I would work with the HIV and AIDS unit, educating teachers in how to work with children. I went to South Africa, and 5 others followed me. So we became 2 communities of 3. 3 of us working in South Africa at the Catholic Institute of Education, and 3 working in Kroonstad.
Okay.
It was a wonderful, glorious time of 7 years, working in the schools, teachers all over the country. We had 300 Catholic schools that we worked in.
Wow.
And on Saturdays, I would volunteer in an AIDS hospice for children. And it was glorious. It was called Cotlands. And it was my time to play and to be with children and just receive and give love. It was a marvelous time. And after 7 years, everybody else was ready to go back to America, but I wasn't. So the Dominican Federation of Southern Africa said, we would like Sisters Dominicans to go to Swaziland. 3 Oakford Dominicans needed to leave there because one was blind, one had twice broken her hip, and one was tired. So the 3 of them left, and 3 of us from 3 different Dominican congregations went to Swaziland. Sizakala was an Oakford Dominican. Tadea was a, it escapes me right this second, and myself and Adrian Dominican. Tadea was a Oakford Dominican. It's okay.
Yeah.
But 3 different congregation of Dominicans. We made a 3-year commitment. So we were living inter-community, all Dominican family, and I worked with a Ugandan sister, Alexa Kabaruka, and I was working again in the schools. We had 60 schools, and we were doing quality education about and pastoral care in the schools. It was wonderful.
Teaching the faculty.
Teaching the teachers.
Yeah.
Teaching teachers.
Yeah.
I'm struggling to remember that 3rd Dominican congregation.
You'll think of it. Then we'll come back and do a spot shot and stick it in the thing.
I'm sure.
Yeah. That's okay. That's okay. So then you were over there?
I was over there 3 years, and I missed Adrian. I came back for chapter and in 2010, and I knew then that when the 3rd year was up, I would return. And so I did. I came back in 2011.
And
I worked in Detroit. I lived in community there. And after a year and a half working at Covenant Community Care, doing fundraising for them, I was asked to come to Adrian and to work in the chapter office of Adrian Crossroads Chapter. So I did that in 2013. And then in 2014 was elected chapter prioress. And each and every move has been a glorious time of listening to the Spirit, responding to the Spirit, When I was called, it was November 19th. Sister Attracted Kelly called me, and she asked me if I would come in. And you don't say no to family. So it's been...
Sometimes you do. You don't say no.
I don't
just
say no to family. I don't. Although in the past I have from time to time.
Yeah.
But in this case, I clearly felt it was the right call. So there had been other times when timing wasn't right. Timing was right for this. So I've been here ever since December of 12, actually really starting, I began in December of 12. But it's been wonderful. I've loved working as the chapter prioress, and I love our women, and it's another different kind of margin as we look at our aging and we look at the changes and the call at this time. And I believe it's the call of our enactments, so beautifully woven together, that leads us and draws us forward in a beautiful response to the signs of our times, just as we always have.
Okay, now I'm going to put you on a path that might be a little difficult. All right, you certainly have evidenced ministry and itinerancy every place around the world in your service to others. Can you share with us how you give, and I know you received a lot back from all of that.
Right. Absolutely.
We can't be engaged in something and not receive something back. But what do you do for Mary Jane Lubinski? Just how do you relax? How do you quiet yourself? How do you sit still?
I sit still every morning.
Okay.
Nearly every morning, unless the needs of the day demand that I get going. But every day. And it's rich and it's sacred. It's quiet time. I'm an extrovert, so actually I recreate in my introvert. I like to be alone. I like to read. I love my friends, and so I can rejoice and celebrate.
Where do you go on vacation? How do you vacation?
Again, I do take the quiet time. Like I've got Killarney signed out for a week in June and into July.
Good.
A whole week by myself. And I'll invite who I want to come and spend the time. I'll have some days alone. I'll have some days with others. I just came back last night from 3 days in Georgia. I was at Mary Praninsky's celebration of her Golden Jubilee.
Nice.
It was wonderful. It was great fun. So my relationships are strong and lasting, and I take time for them. It was a glorious celebration. I stayed with one of our sisters. We just had quality time together and sharing. And so in the midst of it all, there's time for enjoyment. I'm going to see a sister in Rhode Island this coming weekend. As chapter prioress, you visit the sisters in their home and in their ministry. So I kind of add on a little, maybe a day or so to that.
That's what I always said. Whenever you do this travel, which is enjoyable, it is to be with our women, always make it count for you and give yourself a day or two. Good mental health.
That's right.
It's good for you, it's good for the community, it's just good for the common good.
It was wonderful to be in Georgia.
Well, you certainly have, let us know some of the blessings that you've had in your life as you have blessed others. And what gives you energy and purpose, I think you've kind of explained. You have to be on the go.
I love the mission, in the mission of Jesus. And it's about the mission. And, the love of God and the love of others is key. It's all that matters. And I can only say that.
How would you like to be remembered?
You know that song from Goodbye, Mr. Chips? Did I fill the world with love?
Nice, yes. And you have. And I want to thank you, Mary Jane, See, you just expounded on talking about others, which you certainly were part of it. But you certainly are a very generous, exuberant woman of the gospel. You preach by every step you take and by every word you speak. You certainly speak the joy that is so needed in our world today.
Thank you.
And I thank you for that. Thank you for your gift of leadership in our congregation.
It is my privilege.
It is a blessing.
Thank you.
Both ways.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank
and
you.
your kindness and openness and listening ear for so many.
Thank you.
So thank you very much, and continue to enjoy the journey.
It was the Montebello Dominicans.
You've been thinking of that this whole time. Never heard of the Montebello.
KwaZulu-Natal in South Africa.
Okay, so
thank you so much,
so
Peg.
the story's complete.
Thank you.
You're very welcome.